This is a video that looks at some of the Irish involvement in the Crusades to the Holy Land. From the years 1050 to 1300, the Crusades were a series of military expeditions launched from Christian Europe against the peoples of the Holy Lands, encouraged by the Christian Church.
It sparked an enthusiasm to rid the Holy Lands of infidels, primarily Muslims, by force of arms.
At Clermont on the 27th of November 1095, Pope Urban II made an appeal to his French audience to cease fighting one another and to turn to the east against non-Christian enemies. A German monk called Eckhard records, quote, "All the excited souls having taken that pledge, around 100,000 men were chosen, in the presence of the Lord, for military service, that is, from Aquitaine and also from Normandy, England, Scotland and Ireland, Brittany, Galicia, Gascony, Burgundy, Flanders, Lotharingia, and other Christian nations whose names occur very seldom now." Some historians believe Eckhard provides proof that Irish people were amongst the contingents of participants on the First Crusade, which was arguably the most successful as Jerusalem was taken. His report is highly significant, for not only was he an eyewitness to the movement of peoples on the First Crusade, but he was one of the earliest medieval continental writers to distinguish between Scotia and Hibernia.
One historian noted that people from Ireland were participants in the Crusade should in fact come as no surprise, given the connections between Ireland and the continent.
The evidence of the plague that ravaged northern Europe in 1094 and devastated Ireland the following year, hitting the country harder than it did in England, proves one grim example of the links between Ireland and the continent at this time. Directly connecting Ireland to the First Crusade were the strong traditions of penitential pilgrimage that existed in the country at the end of the 11th century. In the Chronicles of the Kings of Man and the Isles relating to Godred Crovan, a Norse Gaelic ruler of the kingdoms of Dublin and the Isles in 1095 states, quote, "Godred subdued Dublin. He subjected the Scots and died in the Isle of Islay. He left 3 sons, Lagman, Harold and Olaf. Lagman, the eldest, assumed the crown and ruled for 7 years. His brother Harold rebelled against him for some time, but was at last captured by Lagman, who castrated him and blinded him."
In the Middle Ages, blinding was a penalty for treason or as a means of rendering a political opponent unable to rule or lead an army in war. And castration, well, that's pretty obvious. No son and heir.
The chronicle tells that Lagman afterwards repented blinding his brother and abdicated his kingdom of his own accord, and marked with the sign of the Lord's cross set out on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but died on the way. A noted historian on the Crusades takes the entry as providing evidence that Lagman was a participant in the First Crusade. The symbol of wearing a cross is strongly associated with the launch of the Crusade, and so seems reasonable to conclude that Lagman was conscious of being a crusader.
It's also worth noting that Lagman could be considered a Norseman, Dane, or more commonly known to us as a Viking.
In 1169, Ireland was invaded by the Anglo-Normans, and the Crusaders would project the classic image of an Anglo-Norman knight. Orders had been made by Henry III in 1252 for the crusade to be, quote, "assiduously preached by Dominicans and other fit preachers." Preaching led to donations, a vital source of income for the crusade. In Ireland, as in England, a tenth of ecclesiastical tax went to the crusades. In 1254, the Archbishop of Dublin was appointed to oversee the collection of this tax. Certain groups were exempt, including the Templars and the Hospitallers. The career of Geoffrey de Joinville, a knight from Champagne in France, came to hold land in England, Wales and Ireland, is a late example of the aristocratic diaspora, typical of the High Middle Ages when nobles moved across Europe in search of better fortunes. Geoffrey's fortunes were secured when he married Matilda de Lacy in 1252, whereby he became lord of the extensive lands in County Meath and the massive Trim Castle, which is Ireland's largest Norman castle. In 1270, Geoffrey made one of the most astute moves of his career in accompanying Prince Edward I of England on the 9th Crusade with a force of 1,000 men. It was an extension of the 8th Crusade and was the last of the Crusades to reach the Holy Land.
As one historian put it, why did Geoffrey and the other English lords, insofar as we can call Geoffrey English, take the cross? Religion would have obviously played a role, and his father, brother and uncles had all been on the Crusades, a family tradition you might say. But the answer was that he could serve God the best way he knew how, by knightly warfare.
Geoffrey prepared for the Crusade of 1270 by building religious houses. The Dominican friars were actively preaching the Crusade in the Sligo and Roscommon area in 1266. Back in the Holy Land, Geoffrey and the other Crusaders were ultimately forced to withdraw since Edward had pressing concerns at home and felt unable to resolve the internal conflicts within the remnant Christian states of the Holy Land.
It is arguable that the crusading spirit was nearly extinct by this time as well.
It also foreshadowed the imminent collapse of the last remaining Crusader strongholds along the Mediterranean coast.
And by 1291, the last Crusader stronghold of Acre fell to the Muslim Mamluks of Egypt.
This shared experience secured the bonds of Geoffrey's relationship with the future King of England, and it is no coincidence that the Joinville was named as the new justiciar of Ireland in 1273. This 14th century illustration of Geoffrey shows how dapper he was, as he is dressed from head to toe in two vertically contrasting colours, and shows an outfit that vertically drapes the entire left-hand side of his body in fawn and the entire right hand of his body in red. These were known as party colours, and he even wears two different coloured shoes. Even the feathers in his hat coordinate exactly with the rest of his ensemble.
Geoffrey would die an old man in his 80s at Trim Castle in County Meath, but he will appear again in another story soon. Until then, thanks for watching and supporting my channel.